The style of indignant despair in Ayi Kwei Armah's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. How might you rage when your homeland is invaded, the majority of your countrymen turn to corruption, and both your wife and mother-in-law fawn over your most dreaded high school classmate, whom, because of the money he has sold himself into, they claim to be a better man? Ayi Kwei Armah's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born is a Kafkaesque story, but grounded in the stark, palpable world of Ghana, where, after following the trip of the nameless protagonist train clerk through the monotony of class struggle, and the literal shit he so often finds himself surrounded by, whether in the work toilet or in his neighborhood's latrine, the reader has to wonder. There must exist some individuals whom fate hounds so viciously that no matter how much we propound free will, life to them is darkness. Yet Armah avoids these black and white generalizations. He writes with Seneca's gravitas and D.H. Lawrence's passionate attention, successfully weaving a detailed narrative replete with fiery inward sermons on loss, dejection, and the remnants of hope. Halfway through the book, in chapter 6, the longest chapter at a little over 24 pages, the narration suddenly shifts to a first person, granting Armah full range to sustain the myriad of thoughts and memories that weigh on our souls every waking moment, whether we're carving arguments, trying to make sense of the world, or recalling the fading past, likewise not to lose our mind. Up until this point, we have been following the nameless protagonist as he has been spat on by an angry bus driver, mocked by a scammer whose bribe he refused, told by his wife that he is the chichidodo bird who, quote, hates excrement with all its soul, but only feeds on maggots, which, the maggots grow best inside the laboratory, end quote, and has confirmed with his teacher that not even Seneca's lifestyle has the least grip on tranquility. After this initial turmoil, Chapter 6 is a waterfall of confession, as if the coming-of-age catharsis in Barry Jenkins' Moonlight, or even Morales and Lund's City of God, was compacted into a few pages, wherein we experience the Ghanaian story of a teenager who, 1, with all the other teens, struggles for employment and the haziness of the future, 2, who falls in love, 3, whose love on the beach at night teaches him and his best friend the self-revealing nature of cannabis, and 4, whose best friend takes his own life. When the reader is hit with such perspective-changing pity in the middle of the story, that pity is transferred to the overarching story, and, at least for me in my attention-deficit mind, I was compelled to finish the book in one more sitting, to see if the train clerk makes it through money's corruption. In a not too dissimilar way, halfway through Don Quixote, the 20-page story of Lothario the Curious Cuckold reinforces the reader's sympathy for the windmill knight's pathetic flaw, his dependence on imagination. But behold with what sweeping pathos Armah begins this midway point chapter, of which I would beg pardon for quoting extendedly, if it was not necessary to take it in all at once, this passage which by itself nearly enters Armah into the canon, and if I didn't have in mind analyzing its manifold significance line by line. Quote, "Why do we waste so much time with sorrow and pity for ourselves? It is true now that we are men, but not so long ago we were helpless messes of soft flesh and unformed bones squeezing through bursting mother holes, trailing dung and exhausted blood. We could not ask then why it was necessary for us also to grow, so why now should we be shaking our head and wondering bitterly why there are children together with the old, why time does not stop when we ourselves have come to stations where we would like to rest? It is so like a child to wish all movement to cease. And yet the wondering and the shaking and the vomiting horror is not all from the inward sickness of the individual soul. Here we have had a kind of movement that should make even good stomachs go sick. What is painful to the thinking mind is not the movement itself, but the dizzying speed of it. It is that which has been horrible. Unnatural, I would have said, had I not stopped myself with asking, unnatural according to what kind of nature? Each movement and each growth, each such thing brings with itself its own nature to frustrate our future judgment. Now, whenever I am able to look past the beauty of the first days, the days of birth, I can see growth. I tell myself that that is the way it should be. There is nothing that should break the heart in the progressive movement away from the beauty of the first days. I see growth. That is all I see within my mind. where I can only see when there is nothing I can feel, I am not troubled. But always these unwanted feelings will come in the end and disturb the tired mind with thoughts that will not go away. How horribly rapid everything has been, from the days when men were not ashamed to talk of souls and of suffering and of hope, to these low days of smiles that will never again be sly enough to hide the knowledge of betrayal and deceit. There is something of an irresistible horror in such quick decay." End quote. My italics highlight especially those moments where Armah's syntax comes as close as it can to being disjointed without being stilted. The effect is a cascading feeling of power, surge after surge of eternal youth raging beyond morality, as if the son of nature herself is coming to terms with having to be born. The D.H. Lawrence connection is clear from the first question. Quote, "I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself. A small bird will drop frozen dead from a bough without ever having felt sorry for itself." End quote. But whereas Lawrence's pithy beauty rings in mankind's constant need to apologize, sorry, in Armah we get the distinction between sorrow and pity. In being critical, we must never underestimate close reading, since every word matters, if even only for the hint we get here that the definition of sorrow is pity for ourselves. Then, in the first potential stilt, quote, "It is true now that we are men," end quote, fellow writers trained to cut any unnecessary words could raise quite the defendable qualm with "now that." But both the style and meaning would suffer without it. We would lose the significance that this is only true now that we are men. Also, there is that dactylic ring to "now that we're men" that, perhaps, I confess, I hold special to my heart because of the song with the same title from the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Armah's cry out to the world soon becomes very philosophical, but to call it an entanglement, which at first it appears, would be to forget the baby with the umbilical cord and placenta. Hell, it could be a stillborn and beautiful, given it is located just where it needs to be. The metaphor is fitting, seeing as in Armah's own raw words at the onset of his argument, we should not forget, quote, "We were helpless messes of soft flesh and unformed bone squeezing through bursting mother holes, trailing dung and exhausted blood," end quote. What a succession of images where each adjective adds something new to the real makeup of our lives, that which we are embarrassed to discuss in front of others, in many circles more so than sex, although each of us reserves the utmost daily concern for our own stool. But either we joke about it or fling it at others in the form of rageous pestering little sibling disgust. Armah, on the other hand, jams right after this serious depiction of how we came to be, of just how raw the human experience begins, a row of questions on the root of nostalgia. If we couldn't ask, as children, why we must grow, what gives us the right now to complain about time moving too fast? Instead, we shake our head, Armah does not lose sight of physicality, and we even have the gall to challenge the idea that there can exist alongside one another youth and old age. In merely restating his argument, I am realizing how subtle a philosophical inquiry he proposes, that rage manifests itself in every judgment, whether conscious or not. We have never had the right for things to come to a standstill, and we never will. Right before the little climax appears the key word stations, echoing images of the protagonist's job as a train station clerk, of the rewarding monotony he eventually comes to appreciate, even if it doesn't automatically qualify a happy ending. These are the roles we feel comfortable settling down in, although they are temporal. Armah wastes no time patronizing, and he immediately hits us with the profound thought in staccato. It is so like a child to wish all movement to cease. Even without correlating this momentous truth with the narrators, not the protagonists, understood irony that the story is pausing here for Armah to let out his soul, this sentence calls for every faithful cogitator to pause and wonder. Sympathy-wise, we immediately think of the children we know and ourselves as children, and that is enough. So much for the first paragraph. There remains a full flowering before Armah delves into his coming-of-age predecessor of Moonlight. He goes with "and yet," which, although Shakespeare's Cleopatra teaches us to detest it, quote, "I do not like but yet. It does allay the good precedents. Fie upon but yet.
Fie upon but yet."
And Benjamin Stark concurs, "Nothing before but counts." It is Melville's Ishmael who, in the overwhelming sympathy we feel for him in Queequeg and the Open Water, wins us over to believe that his "and yet," although a contradiction, is still a proof that trust and beauty and the profound abyss will always win out reason. We already learned in the opening paragraph that reason has a lot to answer for in terms of life and death. The purely rational mind, if there exists such a thing, is going to struggle with what happens next. After Armah again remains physical with the shaking and the vomiting horror, he not only brings the individual soul into play, the rational mind can follow this much, but the effects of our nostalgic judgments on our stomachs and minds, causing all thought to spiritually swirl. As in the passage, so in life, it has all happened so fast. It is that which has been horrible, he says. He admits, Armah, he almost said natural, but in a burst of humanity he makes known his hesitation or process of discovery, and instead of his style becoming juvenile as a result, it takes on a rhetorical flourish which, since the device only happens once, appears like the soldier calmly unsheathing his sword, prepared for one swift strike. In 24 lines, Armah has shifted the argument from the soul to the stomach to the mind, in 24 words, Armah has shifted the argument from the soul to the stomach to the mind, so difficult it is for us to pin down our daily causes, and by grasping after the wisp and realizing the wisp for what it is, seems to confirm the inanity of whoever wants time to stop, and whoever demands life's answer to come forth. Quote, each movement and each growth, each such thing brings with itself its own nature to frustrate our future judgment. End quote. Thus immediately following the realization of just how many kinds of nature there is, or are, Armah synthesizes this thought with his argument so far that life goes on independently of reason, and all future judgment is frustrated with its own nature. Philosophers, eat your heart out. From here on, priority is given to first things, and as Donald Ravel reminds us, in A Hint to Lucretius, first things never die. For Armah, it is the first days, or the days of birth, that old nostalgia bug which only someone cruel or ignorant would squash instead of examine, preserve, or free. Since, as the blinded father Gloucester says before his son, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. Whether the first days are a little ladybug or not, we certainly cannot stay within them anymore. For Armah, quote, whenever he is able to look past the beauty of the first days, he can see growth, end quote. Soon we get the timeless artist's confession that when I can only see, when there is nothing I can feel, I am not troubled. And it is immediately followed with the real world's but, since these feelings always return. Armah then vacillates, as we do when we suffer and compare the past with the future, and although it makes for sublime poetry to give our all to pure attention, the narrator, again not the protagonist, in The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, has given his surcharge, and must slip back into reality. In a recognition inseparable from his own shame of the sad fact that pain and time are two masterless lapdogs to which in the end we all must bow, he concludes, quote, there is something of an irresistible horror in such quick decay, end quote. It is a truism to say life moves too fast and time cannot stop, but not so much when we add that we cannot look away. This style of indignant despair is scattered all throughout Armah's relatively short novel, in between the gritty descriptions and silent lamentation that goes on whenever two characters exchange ideas. Most often it is a character's projection, like, quote, he had looked into the face of the giver, and sure enough the eyes had in them the restless happiness of power in search of admiration. Or, quote, one always wonders why the sea is not much dirtier than it turns out to be. Sometimes, however, the indignant despair meets pure attention, and a terrible beauty is born. Quote, the man sits down, and, feeling now a slight pain at the back of his neck, throws back his head. Small clouds, very white, hold themselves very far away against a sky that is a pale, weak blue, and when the man looks down again into the sea, the water of it looks green and deep. A seagull, flying low, makes a single hoarse noise that disappears into the afternoon, and the white bird flies itself off in the direction of the harbor, and its inaudible noise, beautiful and light on its wings. End quote. I would be remiss not to mention at the novel's climax, the high school friend turned politician goes on the run, and the nameless protagonist must help him escape by forcing him not only to enter the extremely dirty latrine which the politician previously refused to enter, but to crawl through the toilet itself, underground, and out through the hole to which it led. The release of every character ever's pent-up anger can be summed up in this one comic action of he who avoided shit ended up by going headfirst into it. But after the release, the protagonist is quite dazed. After helping him to a boatman who helps him escape, he leaves his political friend by jumping into the water and drifting back to shore. He then washes up on the beach and sees a vision of the girl he used to love long ago, and the first conscious act he witnesses on the way home is a bus driver bribing his way through a police block, and on the back of the bus is one orange flower decorated with that phrase, "The beautiful ones are not yet born." The protagonist's final realization walking home is that he is merely returning to, quote, the never-ending knowledge that this aching emptiness would be all that the remainder of his own life could offer him, end quote. What prevents this from being a purely pessimistic ending is twofold. He walks very slowly home, and, like the halfway passage we analyze hints at, it is complete immobility or quick decay that haunts us. Yes, there exists those people whom fate ultimately hounds and hounds. As Ngugi wa Thiong'o writes in A Grain of Wheat, quote, God helps those who help themselves, it is said with fingers pointing at a self-made man who has attained wealth and position, forgetting that thousands of others labor and starve, day in, day out, without ever improving their material lot, end quote. And this is just a class angle. But in Armah, it is never quite made clear that the narrator is the protagonist. The closest hint we get is that they share the same childhood crush. But that by no means disproves that the protagonist, or the train clerk, could be the man who succumbed to indignant despair, while the narrator, while walking slowly, could be the one who for the purpose of beauty gave into its style, and for his pains in art regained his innocence. Thus the beautiful ones are born. The beautiful ones are not yet born. Get it?